Welcome back to World War II TV. A standard comment by the wereaboos among the world is about the superior ability of the German soldier in World War II. Man for man, they were better than the Russians, better than the British, better than the Americans. To examine that claim, we have renowned Australian historian Robin Pryor, author of numerous books, including this one, Conquer We Must, but many, many others. I'll bring Robin in now. Good evening where you are. Good morning where I are. How are you today?
Very well, Paul. Very well. Thank you.
Good. So I'm going to hand it over to you. I've got some slides there. We may do questions at the end, folks, but Robin Pryor now has kind of 18 minutes to make his case that man for man, well, that it's a myth that the Germans were better man for man. So over to you, Robin.
Well, the interesting thing about the German soldier being the best in, both world wars really, is that probably the man-for-man stuff about war should have ended after the Trojan War. It's really Homer and it's really Achilles v. Hector and so on. And that's possibly the last time a man fought a man on the battlefield and one won and the other lost. What is outstanding about this myth, really, is that in the age of machine warfare, in the 20th century, First World War as well as the Second, it still persists. We still have books that say, books by well-known historians that say, man for man, the Germans were the best troops. How you make this comparison is very interesting. Do you have 12 German soldiers v 12 Britons in a field? No, you don't. It's machine warfare, machine guns, tanks, artillery, and all the accoutrements, air warfare, and so on. And still you get this comparison of man for man. What gave it legs, I think, in the Second World War was the blitzkrieg campaign of 1940. Here we have the Germans brushing aside the French army, forcing the British to evacuate at Dunkirk in a matter of about 30 days. And that seems to me set the gold standard for campaigns in the Second World War. If you took longer than 30 days to beat anybody, you didn't get top points. You didn't win the World Cup of World War battles. You didn't win a medal, even a bronze. So if you took longer than 30 days, that's really not on compared to 1940. The thing about that is that the Germans took much longer in their other campaigns than that one. Look at the Western Desert. Yes, Rommel drives back the Eighth Army time and time again, but does he defeat them? No. What about Barbarossa? The same thing. Terrible losses in the first few months. The Russians lose millions of men. Are they defeated? No, they're not. What we're looking at, I think, with blitzkrieg is in 1940, is that it's a once-off event. It only works once, and it worked against a poorly led French army that did everything to avoid fighting, and when it did have to fight, it didn't fight very well. The British were bound up in that and were part of that general rout, though I would argue that the British actually fought quite well in 1940, but being on a flank and with the other flank surrendering on you, you didn't have much choice but to evacuate. In other words, blitzkrieg works once, but it's worked its magic. It's worked its magic on historians. It's worked its magic on military theorists. Leo Hart said, there you are, I was right all along, though he had said at the time that defence was stronger than the attack and the British didn't even need one armoured division. It is the standard. And what gives it extra piquancy is that the Anglo-American armies in 1944 can't do what the Germans did in 1940. That is, they can't slice through the German army in under 30 days, which we must remember is the gold standard. They can't do that in under 30 days. They can't get to Paris in the time the Germans got from Paris to the coast. So you've got a problem here. The fact is, however, that the Anglo-American armies completely annihilate the German armies in France in a matter of 77 days. It's 11 weeks, folks, in terms of the Somme, in terms of Passchendaele, in terms of many other campaigns, the Western Desert, the Eastern Front. This is Grease lightning. 77 days, 11 weeks, and you've got an army of 500,000 disintegrated. They're either dead, they're prisoners, or they've been driven back across the Seine. But you have periods of what are called stalemates in the Normandy campaign. These are not stalemates, they're pauses while the Americans and or the British group for battle. Yes, they don't capture Caen on the first day. Monty always said they would. Therefore, D-Day is almost marked down as a failure. You didn't get Caen, you didn't get St. Lo, you didn't get across the Cotentin Peninsula. The whole thing's a failure. No, it isn't. You've got 5 landings plus 2 airborne landings, which are really spectacularly successful. What follows in Normandy is a series of battles. We all know them: Epsom, Charnwood, Goodwood, Totalize, Tractable. Not once are these battles a failure. They all capture ground. They don't capture as much ground as Monty said they would, and therefore a lot of historians have marked them down as failures. But Monty is fighting a different kind of war, and Monty is not telling people what kind of war he's fighting. He's fighting battles of attrition, and they eventually work. And attrition is another mark against the Anglo-Americans. It's regarded merely as brute force. The only reason you're winning, people said, is not because you have any skill, but because you have brute force, the name of the book by John Ellis. Well, what's wrong with brute force? It's written up by Ellis and others as though it's somehow unfair. It shouldn't be allowed. It's like having 12 men on a cricket team or something. The advantage is not correct. What that says is that you shouldn't use the resources you have in warfare, which is a ludicrous proposition if ever there was. If you didn't use those resources in warfare, then you deserve everything your own government should give you, like the sack. Of course, the Allies used what resources they had. Of course, they used the strategic bombers. Of course, they used naval power. Why wouldn't they? The fact is, though, on some occasions, brute force didn't work. In particular, with D-Day, we have the aerial bombardment by Bomber Command and the 8th Air Force. By and large, those aircraft missed their targets. On Omaha, there is not one bomb that lands on a German defensive position, not one. It's not so much better on Juno and Gold either. The only one really that works is Utah, where the 9th Tactical Air Force really do a job, helped by the fact that the Americans land in the wrong place where there don't happen to be any defenses. But in the absence of brute force, what happens? The infantry, let's take Omaha as an example. The infantry on Omaha are left almost alone. Most of the swimming tanks, the DDs, sink. Some of them get to the beach, not very many. It's left to the infantry to fight the 352nd Division, a first-class German unit, and they do fight them and they defeat them. All the emphasis on Omaha is about the terrible American casualties and how little ground they gained. The casualties are terrible. They're over 4,000. But the fact is they fight that division to a standstill. They capture the villages in from the draws, and it all works in the end. And it is small groups of infantry with not much more weaponry than bazookas and machine guns that do the job. In other words, they out-infantry the best infantry in the world. That's a quote from Max Hastings' book on Overlord. You can also check his index, tanks, German superiority of. There is no similar entry for artillery, British superiority of. I've checked it and it's not there. So these small groups of infantry do really outmaneuver and outfight their German opponents. The same applies really to the Canadians on Juno, to the 50th Division on Gold, and to the 3rd Division on Sword. They are outfought. In the subsequent battles, not an inch of ground is lost by the British, by the Canadians, by the Americans, not an inch. Every battle might not do what Monty said it was going to do, but every battle pushes the attritional equation a little bit further against the Germans. Every battle gains some ground. Every battle is disastrous for the German command, as they acknowledge, actually, in their post-war memoirs and so on. What a ludicrous situation we do have, though, when we are comparing mass armies as though we're comparing Achilles to Hector. It's absurd. It's the weaponry you have. It's the method in which you organize that weaponry. It's the organization of your army. It's the skill or otherwise of your command that makes the difference. It's not Fritz v. Tommy in a field. This is an item that should have dropped from a military history, but hasn't. And look, it hasn't. You can see some of the reasoning behind it not. Where do you get your stories from? Where do you get your color from? Where do you get your imagery from? You get it from the infantry, and you usually get it from the fighting rifle groups. And that's where the stories are concentrated. What you don't get so much is an artilleryman's diary saying, I fired 100 rounds today. I think they were accurately fired, when in fact those 100 rounds might have made the difference between gaining some ground and not gaining any. No one much wants to write about the artillery, and it seems that no one much wants to read about it either. Yet I would argue in Normandy and elsewhere at Alamein, it was the determinant of victory. Beaver, Anthony Beaver, Max Hastings go on endlessly about German tanks as though the tank is the main weapon. Well, if it's the German main weapon in Normandy, they did, after all, lose the campaign. What is the British and the American main weapon? It's the artillery. It's more flexible, there's more of it, it's accurate, and it's, of course, devastating against tanks. No tank can fight a gun with any hope of success, as Rommel knew because of his experiences in the Western Desert. Time after time, he led the British tankers onto his anti-tank gun screen. In Normandy, the situation is reversed. Monty knows all about artillery, he knows all about bombardments, and he uses them to maximum effect. There's one point in Normandy, 7th, 8th of June, where the Canadians fire 1,200 tons of artillery in 2 days. It stops the 12th SS Panzer Division in its tracks. How many tanks do they lose? Probably 30 or 40. Does anyone talk about that? Not really. Mark Milner's book, Stopping the Panzers, does, but it's a story that should be much more widely known. What closes the fellow's pocket? It's not, as that wonderful painting shows, with a rocket-firing typhoon over the fellow's pocket. We all know the one that was on the cover of Brian Bond's military history. It's not the typhoon. They were notoriously inaccurate. It's the artillery, folks. 85% of the 500 German tanks and armoured personnel carriers destroyed in the fellow's pocket are destroyed by the British, Polish and Canadian guns. That's the determinant of victory, not Fritz v. Tommy in a field.
Well, brilliant stuff, Robin. I'm so glad you mentioned the Canadians and Germans on the 7th and 8th of June, because we talk about it on this channel so often. The narrative that's always told is the thrusting dynamic column sent by Kurt Meyer towards the beach. They never do the second half of the game, where the Canadian artillery, the Canadian infantry, the Canadian forces coming up behind, then clobber, in many cases, the very same tanks that have been moving forward. Same with Villers-Bocage. Villers-Bocage is told from the point of view of the first half of the battle, but never the second half of the battle.
Never the second. A point I've made today in an article for the War Memorial Journal here. Villers-Bocage is one of the most grotesquely written about battles in a history of pretty grotesquely written about battles. The second half is not told. The box, the 22nd Brigade box, when the Germans attacked that, Panzerlehr, no slouches, they suffer enormously. 800 casualties in infantry, 20 or 30 tanks. The balance sheet in tanks is about equal. The balance sheet in infantry is far from equal. The Germans suffer much more at Villers-Bocage. The second half of the story is hardly ever told. You're quite right.
Well, it's interesting, Robin, because one of the shows I'm going to host myself in this series is about the idea there are too many books about the Normandy campaign. And people go, no, there's plenty of books about the Normandy campaign. But my point will be there are too many books about D-Day, but not enough books about the Normandy campaign. Certainly not looking at it all sector by sector together in one volume. There are a few, of course, but we look at it, you know, Mark Zelke writes about the Canadians or whatever, but there are not enough studies where we look at the whole of the 77-day campaign and look at what's happening in the Cotentin town, what's looking at the British airborne over in the east, how it's bite and hold, bit of ground there, bit of ground there. Even the operational studies, they're written one at a time. And for me, you can't just look at Epsom on its own. You have to look at Epsom compared to Perch.
Wait for my book.
Yeah. I can't wait for your book, Robin, because you know we're lacking in this subject, and it gets on my nerves that the stories we tell. Sorry, I was just saying, it gets on my nerves that the stories we tell are the same old tired one. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay today, but
they are very tired. Yeah.
So, any final points you want to make about this man-for-man myth?
I'm on Villers-Bocage.
Sorry, we've got a bit of delay going on.
This is an army, the German army. It has one.
Keep going.
Right.
Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, the German army. Yeah. They've won a battle since 1871. And here we are in 1944, and they're still the best. It's staggering. There's something about this, Paul, that worries me, and it is that at least some historians think that if you're fighting for a democracy, you can't inspire your troops in the same way that you can when you're fighting for a dictatorship. Who have simplistic views that are easily transferable to the troops. I would argue that is complete rubbish, that the men who landed on D-Day were inspired aplenty. They were inspired to defeat fascism, to defeat the Nazi tyranny in Europe, and they knew what they were fighting for. To say that they were less than that is to reduce them to puppets and dupes. and that is a grotesque way of looking at the Second World War. So I'm slightly worried about this tendency to stick with the infantry must be the determinant always of victory.
Well, brilliant. We'll leave it there, Robin. The idea of these is to be short and snappy. We'll have you back on again when you finish your Normandy book. And folks, we're back again in 10 minutes' time with Peter Williams talking about Kokoda, another battle ripe for myth and legend. So thank you very much, Robin. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. We'll see you again in 10 minutes' time. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Cheers.